is the handheld. So this is live also. Good afternoon. I'm Bradley Graham, the co-owner of Politics and Prose, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, and on behalf of the entire staff, welcome. Thank you for coming out on this lovely afternoon. A couple of quick administrative notes. Now would be a good time to turn off a cell phone or anything that might beep during the presentation. And when we get to the Q&A session, because we are being filmed, we would especially appreciate it if you'd find your way to this microphone here so that the tape will pick up your question. And at the end, normally we ask the audience to fold up their chairs, but you don't have to do that at the end of this session because we have another event this evening. On this anniversary of 9/11, it's quite fitting that we should be gathering here for a book that involves our military and a look back at an important part of the long-term fight in which the U.S. armed forces have been engaged. The Iraq War, of course, wasn't necessitated by the September 11th attacks. That war was more one of choice, but it was fought with the purpose, in part at least, of helping to keep America safe. And its lessons, particularly lessons about balancing force and diplomacy and relying on indigenous forces, those lessons remain very relevant today, especially as we in this country prepare to re-engage in Iraq and go after yet another enemy in the form of the group that calls itself the Islamic State. Dan Green and Brigadier General Bill Mullen both served in Iraq, overlapping in Anbar province, which is in the western part of the country. That the book that they've co-authored, Fallujah, Redux, focuses on a critical turning point in the Iraq War, a turn called the Anbar Awakening, when Sunni tribes in the province joined the battle against al-Qaeda-affiliated forces. Dan is a reserve. This is Dan, by the way. Yeah, that's Bill. Yes. They're both pretty big, brawny guys here. Dan is a reserve officer in the U.S. Navy and served as a tribal and political engagement officer for a naval special warfare unit. I guess that's a SEAL team, essentially, right? No comment, right? In Fallujah in 2007. He also has done duty in Afghanistan, both as a military officer and as a civilian with the State Department. In fact, his first book 3 years ago, titled The Valley's Edge, was about a year with the Pashtuns in south central Afghanistan. Dan, who also has a doctorate in political science from George Washington University, is now a research fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, focusing on counterterrorism and counterinsurgency operations. I might add as well that Dan is a regular here at Politics and Prose, and we're very grateful for that. Bill has been a Marine for, 28 years? 28 years now, and currently is with the Combat Development Command at Quantico. He spent 2 years in Fallujah, first as the operations officer for a Marine regimental combat team from 2005-2006, and then as an infantry battalion commander in charge of the city for most of 2007. Fallujah has particular significance in the history of the Iraq War. It became a center of insurgent activity and was the scene of one of the U.S. military's biggest setbacks in the first year of the Iraq War. U.S. forces eventually retook the city in late 2004, but insurgent groups continued to operate in and around Fallujah. Then in 2006-2007, as President Bush decided to surge U.S. troops in Iraq, local tribes also moved to reject al-Qaeda-affiliated fighters And the United States was able to coordinate these efforts by the local tribes with the pacification campaign of U.S. and Iraqi security forces. That coordination, of course, has since come undone in the wake of the U.S. withdrawal and sectarian misrule by the Maliki government. And Fallujah is now occupied by Islamic State fighters. Now, while much has been written about what happened in Anbar, Dan and Bill offer the perspective of those who actually served there. In their book, they hold up Fallujah an example of what can be achieved by the right combination of leadership and perseverance. Their story is not really the story of the major military battles in 2004, but of the more complex military, political, and diplomatic moves 3 years later that did, for a time anyway, bring greater peace to that war-torn area. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to make one other note that Bill has asked me to make. He is his remarks here are personal. They do not represent those of his command or the U.S. Marine Corps or the American Armed Forces. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming both Dan Green and Brigadier General Bill Mullen.
Thank you very much. What I thought I'd begin with is sort of why Bill Mullen and I wanted to write this book. You know, a lot of the, how we remember war is so important. And there are so many books, for example, about the battles of Fallujah, and appropriately so. And when it comes to the city of Fallujah, it sort of has an iconic status. But when Fallujah was finally won in 2007, from our perspective, victory wasn't a thunderclap, it was more of a whimper. And partly for that reason, it wasn't really covered that much by the media. There haven't really been any books written about it. But at the end of the day, it's often more important how you finish a war than sometimes how you start it. And one of the primary reasons we wanted to collaborate on this book is to tell sort of what we felt at the time was sort of the final chapter of Fallujah, and how eventually the U.S. forces learned a lot about Iraqi culture. We learned a lot about stability operations and counterinsurgency. And there was a process of learning within the military after repeated tours that eventually we had an understanding of what was required to bring stability to Fallujah and may provide some lessons for the future, not just against ISIS, but against al-Qaeda and other groups around the world. And so we wanted to write the book to capture this moment that we both had a chance to experience. We were there in 2007 for 6 months. And we felt like if we were able to put this on paper, that maybe someday future units which may have to perform similar tasks, and they're not going to read a dry after-action report. You know, they're going to read probably a memoir. That's how a lot of people get their understanding of war from books. So that's partly why we wanted to collaborate on this. And then also we wanted to showcase that success is possible in this kind of conflict. When I arrived in April and Bill arrived in March of 2007, there were approximately 750 security incidents in the city of Fallujah and the surrounding countryside. That included improvised explosive devices, that included sniper attacks, rocket-propelled grenade attacks, you name it. And by applying a counterinsurgency approach in the city of Fallujah, which Bill led along with the Iraqis, and then in partnering with the tribes that surrounded the city, we were able to slowly squeeze the al-Qaeda and eventually push them out of the area to the point that by 6 months later, we had less than 80 security incidents taking place in the Fallujah countryside and in the city. So we felt we wanted to chronicle this. We wanted to put it on paper so that future generations may have a chance to read it. And also we want to write a book that showcased the sacrifice, because I think one thing Bill and I are very keen on is we want to make sure that we're not saying that it was the two of us that got it right and that's why things changed. We benefited from the sacrifices of countless others prior to our arrival. We benefited from a lot of social movements and things taking place in Iraq with the Anbar Awakening that had nothing to do with us individually, but we were able to take advantage of that. And so we wanted to capture the sacrifices of people who had come before us and to show that their sacrifices weren't for naught, that eventually we did achieve success and other things took it apart later on. So what I thought I'd do is kind of turn over to Bill to talk a little bit about what Fallujah was like before we both served there together, give you a sense of things, and then he'll share his perspective on how we started to change the city.